As voters across Scotland head to the polls later this week, Nicola Sturgeon has told the country that after sleepless nights facing tough decisions, hers is the only party with a serious plan for recovery after the pandemic.
A survey for Good Morning Britain has revealed that the SNP are predicted to win a majority, but are still 3 seats short of an overall majority. So it's saying that 47% of would-be voters said they would choose SNP for their constituency vote, with the Conservatives and Labour each tied on 21%. However, when asked how they may vote if a referendum on independence were held tomorrow, 47% would vote to leave the UK and 53% would vote to stay. Well, I'm pleased to say we're joined now by First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. Thanks so much for giving us your time on a bank holiday Monday. Very good to see you this morning. So just looking then with our survey and our results there, I know you have many polls that you do. You're going to be the largest party, which must be good, but not an overall majority. And still, in terms of voting to leave, the figures aren't that different, really, only a shift of 2% since the last referendum.
So let me take those points in turn. In terms of the poll for Thursday's election, we've got 3 days to go. The SNP is clearly ahead, but we take nothing for granted. And the message of that poll and all polls just now really is quite simple. If you want me re-elected as First Minister to continue to steer us through the crisis and to lead an SNP government, then you really must come out and vote SNP on Thursday with both votes. The Scottish Parliament electoral system is designed to prevent overall majorities. So for any party to get an overall majority is a real feat. So we can't take that for granted. It is possible because the SNP has done it before, but it really will take every single voter who supports the SNP to come out on Thursday to vote. On the independence question, you know, we've had lots of polls over the last year or so, some of them showing independence now in the lead, most of them showing independence now in the lead, some showing that independence is still slightly under 50%. And, you know, that really underlines the central point I keep making, which is that we have got to persuade a majority of people of independence. There's no shortcuts. We can't bulldoze our way there. And first and foremost, we have to continue to steer the country safely through COVID. So if I'm re-elected on Thursday, that remains my priority, to get us through the crisis, to get us into recovery. And then when the crisis is over, yes, to give people that choice of independence. Because if we don't choose our own future in Scotland, people like Boris Johnson choose it for us. And we've all seen over Brexit, for example, the consequences of that.
Yeah, if you don't get an overall majority, can you justify pushing for an independence referendum? And I say that sort of with my Welsh hat on as well. I've lived in Wales. I've learnt the Welsh language. I get it. When I lived in Wales, I could see how Westminster doesn't always represent the nations. Actually, a lot of the time, they're not thinking about the nation. So I get how you feel in Scotland, but if you haven't got the backing of the Scottish people to an extent, to a degree that would say we need to have an independence referendum, how can you push it through?
Well, what will matter when we get the results of the election on Thursday, and what the test of that will be, is whether there is a majority of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament who have stood on a manifesto saying, if we're elected, we want an independence referendum. Now, that may be a majority of SNP MSPs, or it may be the SNP plus the Greens, for example. So, you know, the basic principle
Alex Salmond, of course,
democracy.
with Alba.
Well,
so
you know,
would you work with Alex Salmond?
No, that's not in my planning. The polls would suggest, and polls are only polls, I concede that Alex Salmond's party is not likely to be a big presence in the Scottish Parliament after Thursday. But the basic principle of democracy is if there is a majority of MSPs elected favouring an independence referendum, then that is a mandate for that when the Scottish Parliament deems the time is right. Sorry
to interrupt, but you could have the situation where you rely on the Greens and Alex Salmond, predicted to have 3 seats, 3 MSPs. I mean, that could be an interesting situation. You campaigning with Alex Salmond for an independence referendum, Alex Salmond, who you say you won't work with. I mean, if that happens, would you work with him?
There's no to the best of my knowledge, I've not seen the detail of your survey. I look forward to seeing that later. But to the best of my knowledge, there has been no opinion poll that suggests that the majority in the Scottish Parliament for an independence referendum will be dependent on Alex Salmond's party. Now, if that turns out to be a different result, I'll come back and talk to you about what I want to do there. I think we have to patiently build the case and build the majority support for independence. I don't think it helps that case to have voices such as those in his party who seem to think that we don't have to bother with that. We just bulldoze our way there by engineering some kind of supermajority. I want Scotland to become independent, and that means doing the hard work to persuade a majority of people. But right now we're 3 days from the election,
yes,
and I'm hard at work persuading everybody I can across Scotland to put their trust in me, to put their trust in the SNP, first and foremost, to steer us through the remainder of this pandemic, to start implementing that really bold progressive manifesto we published a couple of weeks ago, and then when the time is right, to give people the choice over independence, because it comes back to that central point. Yeah. Scotland's future and Scotland's recovery, what kind of country we recover to. If we don't take those decisions into our own hands, then we have Westminster politicians like Boris Johnson taking those decisions for us, and that often leads us in a direction that is opposite to the one that a majority of people in Scotland want to go in.
OK, well, looking at some of your manifesto commitments, you are promising to fund the NHS with an increase of 20%, to abolish dental charges and to freeze income tax, as far as I know. And the mathematicians have done their sums and found that the difference between the taxes you would take in and what you want to spend is £40 billion. So how can you afford it?
I haven't seen that calculation. I mean, the Scottish Parliament entire budget is not quite, is only around £40 billion. So I'm not quite sure where that calculation comes from. That is completely and utterly wrong. Let me tell you exactly what our manifesto would cost and how we would pay for it. So by the end of the term of the Parliament, and we're talking resource revenue spending here, which is the day-to-day spending, the commitments in our manifesto total about £6.1 billion over and above what we spend right now. We pay for that. The Scottish Government published in January what's called our medium-term financial strategy. That looks at the forecasts from independent bodies like the Scottish Fiscal Commission, the Office of Budget Responsibility, makes cautious assumptions about the growth in the Scottish Government budget, the block grant, but also our devolved tax revenues. It gives a high, central and low scenario. And the central scenario shows that our budget is projected to grow over the next Parliament in resource terms by about £6.5 billion. So we've costed our manifesto underneath that central, most realistic scenario. Okay. So it is cautiously done, it is responsibly done. But the final point I want to make is...
So there isn't a gap between tax revenue and spending. You're confident that it's there?
Scotland overall within the UK has a gap between what it spends and what it raises. The UK has a gap. The UK's deficit is about £300 billion right now. Most countries have deficits and debt. We're not in charge of the macroeconomic policy right now, but debt and deficit is a feature of most countries right now, particularly as we come out of the COVID pandemic. But our manifesto commitments are affordable, and we've pitched those responsibly. But the point I was going to finish on there is that as we come out of the pandemic, there's a real imperative to invest in economic growth, but also invest in some of the deep-seated challenges that this pandemic has shone a light on, inequality and poverty, and that's what our bold manifesto does. It also, of course, supports the transition to a net zero economy, something so important for everyone as we tackle the climate emergency.
Yeah.
So can I just ask you, as you mentioned the pandemic, I know I've heard you speak before about regrets about the lack of knowledge that was presented to you in terms of care homes and how it was tackled, and, you know, your personal regrets that keep you awake at night about the numbers of those in care homes that have lost their lives due to the pandemic. But there are details that say that you were warned at the beginning of March about the release of those from care homes, and the deaths are 3 times higher because of that. And so it does make, when you're talking about trust to handle it, it does make people wonder if you're clear now about the way forward.
We're still learning about this virus every single day, and we try to adapt our response depending on that learning. If I can come specifically to care homes, I think everybody in a leadership position should be very, very reflective of the things that we might have done differently had we known everything then that we know now about the virus, because it's important we learn lessons. We've already had experts here in Scotland do an initial study into this, and before I say this, one death is one too many, and we've got lots of lessons to learn. But they have found that while they can't rule out any impact, there is no statistically significant association specifically between hospital discharges and care home outbreaks. They say the much bigger driver of care home outbreaks was the size of the care home. Now, we need to do a lot more. That's why I think I'm still the only leader in all of the 4 UK nations to give an unequivocal commitment to a public inquiry into our handling of this, including our handling of what happened in care homes, and to get that inquiry underway, I hope, before the end of this year. And I still hope that the other leaders in the other 3 nations will join me in making that commitment.
And I'm sure that will go ahead. And just one word about independence again, because of course it is one of the things that is central to your party and people were looking at when they're voting in 3 days' time. When we've seen all the problems that have occurred with the border in Northern Ireland, with where that border should go, with leaving the EU, when we've seen the problems that have occurred there, how are you going to manage a border with an independent Scotland? Because there are lots of London School of Economics has estimated between 15 to 30% would be the cost of trade from Scotland to the rest of the UK if that border were in place. So it would be an expensive way to get independence, wouldn't it, for you?
Well, I think we've got to reflect on where we are right now. And the first thing we would do is not have the chaotic, unplanned transition that characterised Brexit. Many of the problems with Brexit are inherent in Brexit, but some of them, of course, are caused by just the complete lack of planning. But where we are now is this. Borders have been created because of Brexit. Scottish export businesses are already paying the price of that. They are already suffering the inconvenience of that. So what we need to think about as we consider the independence issue is how if you
want to stay with Europe,
I promise you I'm not avoiding the question. I just want to put it in context, is that we need to consider how do we manage things in Scotland that maximises our trading opportunities and not narrows those trading opportunities that is happening right now. So we would, if we were in the European Union, as I hope an independent Scotland would be, we would have to deal with and comply with the rules of that in terms of regulatory issues with goods and services and the customs checks. We would do that, and we would have the ability and the time to do that in a way that did not provide practical barriers to trade between Scotland and England, because that is important. But the benefit of that is that we regain access to the European single market, which is 7 times bigger than the UK market. If you look at manufactured goods right now, we export more to the rest of the world than we do to the rest of the UK. So that bigger trading opportunity is really important. It would also make Scotland a magnet for inward investment. And the last point I would make on this, because it's really important for people, is that what I've just said there is about goods and services. In terms of people, Scotland would be in the common travel area. Nobody serious suggests otherwise. And therefore, people, if we were independent, would continue to have free movement across the common travel area, but again, regain that free movement across the European Union. So independence is actually about expanding our horizons, not narrowing them.
It's worth pointing out, if an independent Scotland was in Europe, you wouldn't have 2.8 million people vaccinated, would you?
Well, I just think that is utterly nonsense.
Well, look at Europe. Look at Europe. They're way behind in our vaccination
But no country
programme.
is bound to do that. The UK was still within the transition period when it procured the vaccine, and that didn't prevent it procuring the vaccine on a 4 nations basis with England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. The way we procure the flu vaccine every year, that was done. Nothing would have prevented that happening had we still been in the European Union. And of course, the delivery of the vaccination programme in Scotland is down to the sterling efforts and fantastic work of NHS Scotland, vaccinators and teams across the country. And they have my deep and everlasting appreciation for the fantastic work that they are doing.
And the procurement of the UK government getting those vaccines.
4 nations, well, look, hold on. We do it voluntarily on a 4 nations basis. It's not a gift from the UK government to Scotland. We choose to pool our efforts in that way. We do it with the flu vaccine every year. Scotland could, if it chose, procure the vaccine separately. Health is devolved, but we choose to do it on a 4 nations basis because it makes sense. And if Scotland was independent, it may well be that we still choose to do that. So these arguments that we couldn't do these things if we were independent, frankly, are nonsense and don't stand up to any scrutiny whatsoever. The vaccination programme is a success. It's offering all of us hope for the future. And as I say, I am so grateful and appreciative to the NHS workers who are delivering that every single day right now.
Yeah, of course, we all are. Nicola Sturgeon,
Thank
Thursday's coming up. Big day for you and everyone in politics. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And this interview is part of a series of interviews with political party leaders ahead of the local and national elections on Thursday.